In 2009, a 17-year-old boy stepped outside for a walk and never came back. No noise, no note. Just his dinner left getting cold on the table and a porch light that would burn every night for the next 12 years. But what no one knew, not his family, not even me, was that Lucas Merritt wasn't taken. He walked into the dark all on his own. And when I finally saw him again, it wasn't in a hospital or a jail or a morgue. It was on a YouTube prank video. Before I go any further, drop a comment with where you're listening from and tap that like and subscribe if stories like this have ever brushed close to your life. Every click helps pull one more name back into the light. My name's Ethan Walker. I was born and raised just north of Austin in a quiet neighborhood where you could still hear cicadas humming through the trees and kids shouting from backyard trampolines. Back then, life felt simple, safe. My world was Friday night football games, gas stations, slushies, and summer bike rides that didn't end until your legs gave out. Lucas Merritt lived 2 streets over from me. He was my best friend from the time we were 8. Always wore these busted-up sneakers and carried a guitar pick in his pocket even though he couldn't really play yet. He used to say it helped him think. Lucas was that kind of person, thoughtful in a way you didn't always notice right away. He remembered your dog's name, your sister's birthday, the song you played once in the car and forgot you liked. His mom, Janet, worked long shifts at a diner off Route 183. Sweet lady, tired a lot but kind. His little sister Emily was still in middle school the last time I saw her. Lucas kind of raised her when their dad left, made sure she ate, walked her home from school. And I think that's what made what happened even harder to swallow. Because on the outside, their life looked steady. Not easy, but steady. Janet's house was small but clean. The porch always swept. There were flowers in chipped pots by the steps. But now, looking back, yeah, there were cracks. Lucas had this way of going quiet sometimes. He'd zone out mid-sentence or just stare off toward the horizon like he was waiting for something to find him. I remember once we were riding bikes down by the drainage creek and he said, "You ever feel like this town's a jacket that doesn't quite fit anymore?" I laughed, but he didn't. And I guess that's when I first felt it, that he was getting ready to leave in some way I didn't understand. The last day I saw him, it was hot, late August. School hadn't started yet, and we'd been messing around with a busted radio, trying to pick up music from San Antonio. He was joking with Emily when I left, teasing her about her peanut butter addiction, still smiling when he walked me to the door. That night, Janet made meatloaf his favorite. He told her he was going for a walk before dinner, just a quick one. Slipped on those same old sneakers, leather bracelet on his wrist, and let the screen door slap shut behind him. He never came back. By 9 o'clock, the street was quiet. You could hear the sprinklers turning off and dogs barking down the block. Janet's porch light was still on, meatloaf cooling on the table, his room untouched, and in that stillness before the sirens, before the flyers, something had already broken. We just didn't know it yet. It was after 10 when Janet called me. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the edges fraying. She said Lucas hadn't come back and asked if I'd heard from him. I told her no, but I was already grabbing my keys. By the time I pulled up, the porch light was still burning, same as it always did, casting that yellow ring of glow across the front steps. The house was too quiet. Janet stood by the screen door in her slippers, arms crossed tight against her chest. She didn't cry. Not then. Just kept glancing down the street like he might round the corner any second. I stayed out there a while with her scanning the road, trying to make sense of something that didn't have a shape yet. It wasn't like Lucas to be late for dinner, and it sure as hell wasn't like him not to call. Janet called the police around midnight. A patrol car came by about half an hour later, lights off, just coasting down the block. The officer asked a few questions, wrote some things down on a small pad, and told her it was probably nothing. "He's 17, right? Probably just needed some space." he said like that was supposed to help, but I could tell even then he didn't believe it either. A few more hours passed and then it started. The searchlights, the neighbors, the flyers. Volunteers in safety vests walked the back trails behind the neighborhood. There were folks from church, kids from school, people we hadn't seen in years showing up with bottled water and flashlights. Dogs were brought in trained to follow scent. They started at the edge of the woods behind the Merritt place and fanned out barking into the night. I kept thinking it had to be a mistake. Maybe he tripped and hit his head. Maybe he wandered off, had some kind of episode. But then they found nothing. No shoes, no shirt, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Just empty trails and quiet trees. That was the first time it really hit me. He was gone. I started checking everywhere I could think of: the old water tower, the bus depot near the highway, even the burned-out church off County Road 6 where we used to sneak cigarettes when we were 15. Nothing. The longer he was missing, the stranger the theories got. Some folks said he ran off to California. Others whispered about drugs, mental breakdowns, even cults. But none of that made sense. Not with Lucas. He was grounded. Restless, sure. Always dreaming of something bigger. But he wouldn't just vanish without a word. He wouldn't do that to Emily, or to Janet, or to me. Detective Dana Coulter was assigned to the case. She came by the Merritt house that second day, heavy binder already in hand. She was quiet, serious, not the type to promise easy answers. I remember her walking through Lucas's room, standing still for a long time in the doorway, eyes tracing the posters on the wall, the notes scribbled in the margins of a notebook left open on the desk. She asked questions. When was the last time I saw him? What we talked about, if he'd seemed anxious or strange. I told her everything, every word I could remember. She listened, nodding, but never gave anything away. It was the third day when the media showed up. First local, then regional. Camera crews parked on the curb, anchors doing stand-ups in front of the porch light Janet refused to turn off. Lucas's photo flashed on the news, that same one from junior year. Slightly crooked smile hair, pushed back like he hadn't bothered to look in the mirror. They described him as 5'11", 145 pounds, last seen wearing a gray t-shirt and faded jeans. If you see anything, call the tip line, they said. But no one saw anything. Days turned into weeks. September came, then October. The flyers started to fade. Weather peeled the corners back. Some were taken down, some were defaced. One night I saw Janet drive around the neighborhood by herself, taping new ones up. She didn't say a word, just worked in silence, pressing that same piece of tape down flat, like it could hold her son in place. I started driving different routes to and from work just to look. Bus stations, shelters, places Lucas had once mentioned in passing. I even checked old online message boards back when those were still around, hoping someone might have posted something. There were fake leads. One from a guy in Arizona who swore he saw Lucas at a truck stop. Another from a woman in Florida who sent a blurry photo of a young man playing guitar under a bridge. But none of them panned out. None of them were him. Janet kept meeting with Dana Coulter. She'd drive down to the station every few weeks, sit across the desk, ask if there was anything new. Dana always said the same thing. "We're still looking." I could tell it was eating at her too. She kept the case file close. Never handed it off, never marked it cold, not officially. And yet we all felt it happening, the fading. People stopped asking, stopped calling. Even Emily, who used to talk about him like he was coming home any day, started speaking of him less and less, like she had to shut that part of herself off to keep going. Janet left his room untouched. His guitar still leaned against the corner. His backpack hung by the door. The porch light burned every night without fail. I think it became a kind of ritual, a line in the sand against forgetting. One night, maybe a year in, I came over and sat on the steps with her. We didn't say much. She handed me a mug of coffee and we watched the sun set. After a while, she said, "I still make enough dinner for 3. Can't help it." I didn't know what to say to that. Just sat there listening to the quiet hum of a world that had learned how to live without him. But I hadn't. I couldn't. I carried his absence everywhere, in the passenger seat of my car, in the empty chair at the diner, in the missed birthdays and Thanksgivings. And all the while, something kept nagging at me. That last day when I said goodbye, Lucas had looked calm. Not happy, not sad, just settled, like he knew something was about to end. I never told anyone that, not even Janet. I wasn't sure if I believed it myself, but in the back of my mind it stayed. Because as much as we searched as loud as the town got during those first few weeks, the night he vanished was dead quiet. No scream, no tire marks, just silence and a plate of meatloaf waiting on the table. And if you've ever known someone that well, someone whose every quirk you could spot from across a crowded room, you know when they've left something behind on purpose. What I didn't know not yet was that the first clue had already surfaced, not in Austin, not even in Texas, but nearly 1,000 miles away, caught in the corner of a video meant to make people laugh. I wouldn't see it for another 11 years, but when I did, it would change everything. It was a Saturday when it happened. I wasn't looking for anything, not consciously. Just killing time clicking through videos like most people do when they don't want to think too hard. The clip wasn't even about anything important. One of those prank channels, the kind that sticks microphones in strangers' faces and runs off laughing. The thumbnail had a guy in a banana suit. I clicked it, watched for maybe 20 seconds, and then I stopped breathing. It was a crowd shot, wide-angle Los Angeles street lot of movement. But in the corner, maybe 3 seconds in, a man turned toward the camera. Just enough to catch his face. He was older, heavier, had a beard now and lines around his eyes. But there was something in the way he laughed, the tilt of his head, the way his shoulders curled when he smiled, that punched me straight in the chest. I knew it before I even thought it. It was Lucas. I rewound the clip, paused. It zoomed in until the image started to blur. It didn't matter. That was him. That was my best friend, 12 years gone, declared missing, practically a ghost. And there he was, standing on a sidewalk in Los Angeles like nothing had ever happened. I must have replayed that laugh 20 times. It was buried under traffic noise and people shouting, but I could still hear it. The same laugh from when we used to sneak into concerts downtown. The same one from late-night bike rides when everything felt too big and too close all at once. It didn't sound haunted. It didn't sound scared. It sounded real. That's what got me. Not just the face, but that sound. I didn't sleep that night. My computer stayed open on that frame, like if I stared hard enough I could get him to talk. The next morning, I went digging. Searched his name, his age, everything I could remember. Most of the results were old archived news articles, cold case links, dead forums. I found a missing poster someone had uploaded in 2012 and never taken down. The comments were mostly spam except one. Just a few lines. Saw someone who looked like this guy near 7th and Broadway, LA. Wore a leather bracelet, wouldn't make eye contact. It was dated 8 years ago. No one had replied. No one had followed up. But I remembered the bracelet. I'd given it to Lucas when we were 15, bought it at a flea market out by the lake. Leather band with a silver clasp initials carved inside with a pocket knife. Mine and his. Just 2 letters. That was our thing back then. The kind of detail only 2 kids would think meant something. If this guy on the street, the man in the video, was wearing that same bracelet. It wasn't a look-alike. It wasn't a coincidence. It was him. I printed the video frame and brought it to Janet's house. Her porch looked just the same. Wind chimes on the corner. Worn welcome mat. Porch light still burned even in the daylight. When she opened the door, I didn't say anything right away. Just held out the picture. She stared at it for a long time, then brought it closer, squinting at the grainy shape of his face. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's my boy." We sat in the living room for almost an hour. She kept staring at the printout like it might fade if she looked away. Finally, she said, "I hear footsteps sometimes, out by the screen. I always thought it was the wind." She hadn't told anyone that, not even Emily. There were other things too, little things she'd brushed off as grief. A folded scrap of paper tucked in the doorframe, once no words, just a rough sketch of a guitar. Another time muddy footprints up the front steps stopping just before the door. Now suddenly all of it felt different, like pieces of a message we hadn't known how to read. When I asked her if we should go to the police, she just shook her head. "They'll say we're seeing what we want to see." And she wasn't wrong. The file had been marked cold for years. Nobody in town talked about it anymore. To them, Lucas was already a ghost. I didn't blame them. Grief wears people down, makes them stop looking. But for me, that door had swung back open. I needed someone to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. I thought of Detective Coulter. She'd retired a few years after the case was archived, moved into a smaller place near the edge of town. I drove out there that evening and knocked on her door. She answered wearing an old sweatshirt and reading glasses, surprised to see me, but not unkind. When I showed her the photo, she didn't speak for a while. Just stared slowly, lowering herself into the chair by her front window. "I kept the file," she said, finally, almost like a confession. "It's still in my closet. Couldn't quite let it go." She brought it out, thick binder, faded name on the label. We flipped through it together. Interview notes, photos, red ink tracing the streets we'd searched over and over. "Do you believe it's him?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "Then I believe something's changed." That was all I needed. I drove home, wired and restless. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't sit still. That night, I logged back into an old email I hadn't used in years, the one Lucas and I used to send music back and forth. It was still active. No new messages, but I typed one anyway. Just 2 lines. "I saw you. If it's really you, please let me know you're okay." I hit send, knowing full well it might land nowhere, or maybe just maybe in front of someone who wasn't ready to be found. A week later, I got a reply. Not an email, a postcard. No return address, just a hand-drawn sketch of a river and 2 boys on bikes. No names, no note, no question. But I knew that drawing. I knew who'd made it, and I knew what it meant. Lucas wasn't gone. He was out there, watching, leaving crumbs. And for the first time in 12 years, I stopped thinking like someone who'd lost a friend. I started thinking like someone who might still find him. I didn't tell anyone about the postcard. Not at first. I kept it tucked inside a book on my nightstand, half afraid it would disappear if I left it out too long. But I couldn't stop staring at it. The sketch wasn't perfect. The river bend was slightly too sharp. The bikes weren't detailed, but I remembered that exact stretch of road. It was where Lucas and I used to race after school, where we'd lie on the grass with our arms behind our heads, talking about what we'd do when we got out of that town. He'd always said he wanted to leave first, not because he didn't care, but because he needed to. "Some people stay because they're built to stay," he once told me. "Some of us are just meant to drift." At the time, I thought it was just something poetic he said to sound older than he was. Now I wasn't so sure. For weeks after the video and then the postcard, I couldn't focus. I'd be driving or at work, and my mind would start running laps. I kept watching the clip over and over, not just to see him, but to study everything around him. The storefronts, the trash cans, the painted crosswalks, even the other people walking past. I slowed the video to frame by frame, scanned street signs in the distance. Eventually, I found a match. The prank had been filmed in Los Angeles near a stretch of sidewalk just off 7th Street downtown. It took a while to confirm the mural behind him had since been painted over, but some of the details still lined up. Same cracked curb, same bike rack. I started bookmarking everything I could find about that block maps, photos, restaurant directories. I even emailed the prank channel pretending to be a fan, asking when and where the clip was filmed. They never responded, so I did the only thing I could think to do. I booked a flight to LA. I didn't tell Janet or Emily, and I didn't call Dana Coulter either. I wasn't sure what I was chasing, or whether I had any right to chase it. But something had shifted in me. It wasn't grief anymore. It was closer to compulsion. I landed early on a Thursday, picked up a rental car, and drove straight to that sidewalk. It was louder than I expected. Street performers, food trucks, a guy yelling about end times through a blown-out megaphone. I stood in the same spot where Lucas had been, camera still in hand, scanning every face that passed. For 3 hours I waited. Nothing. I tried again the next day. Nothing. That night I wandered farther downtown, walked blocks I didn't recognize, asked questions I didn't know how to phrase. One busker remembered a quiet guy who sometimes sketched people on a bench near 6th, said he was polite, kept to himself. Another mentioned a man who wore headphones all the time and looked like he didn't want to be noticed. No one remembered his name. A man on a milk crate pointed me toward a street mural a few blocks over, said it had been painted by someone who signed MC. When I got there, it was just as he said, a tall wall behind a laundromat, colors fading under the sun. The signature was in the corner, barely visible, 2 lowercase letters in black. I stood there for a long time. I didn't take a photo. Didn't need to. I recognized the style, the edges, the shapes. Lucas used to draw like that in the margins of his notebooks. He'd sketch with his pencil, tilted just so, always quick, always moving, like if he stopped, the image would slip away. It didn't feel like a discovery. It felt like being watched. I stayed another 4 days. I walked alleys, talked to vendors, showed photos to people who didn't want to talk. Some stared too long. Some looked away too quickly. One woman behind a coffee cart said she might have seen him, then changed her mind and shrugged me off. I started to feel like I was chasing a shadow. And then one night back at the cheap motel I was staying in off Alvarado, I came back from dinner to find an envelope on the floor just inside the door. No stamp, no handwriting, no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid, old, maybe 5 or 6 years faded. It showed Lucas standing in front of a run-down apartment building, his expression blank. He wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't smiling. But it was him. I turned the photo over. On the back, someone had written 3 words in small block letters. "Stop looking now." I sat on the edge of the bed, holding that photo, trying to breathe through the wave that hit me. I didn't know who had sent it. I didn't know when it had been taken, but whoever put it there knew where I was staying, and they knew I hadn't stopped. I barely slept. My thoughts were tangled between fear and something colder. Not quite regret, more like the realization that I'd crossed a threshold without knowing it. That this wasn't about missing persons or old memories anymore. This was something else. The next morning, I packed my things and left the motel. I didn't fly home. Not yet. Instead, I drove the rental down through every neighborhood I could find that matched the building in the photo. For most of the day, I came up empty. Until just before sunset, when I turned down a side street in the Arts District, and there it was, 4 stories high, faded pink paint, iron bars on the windows. The same cracked stairs, the same leaning fence. The apartment from the photo. And just like that, I knew. I was standing where he had been, where he might still be. I sat in the car with the engine running, staring at the front door like it might open on its own. I didn't go in. Not yet. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something told me not to knock. Not until I had more than a hunch and a photo and a sketch on a postcard. I took a picture of the building. Then I drove back to the airport. I didn't go home empty-handed, but I went home heavy. Because that Polaroid hadn't just warned me to stop. It had confirmed something far worse. Lucas hadn't vanished. He'd hidden himself. And someone, maybe him, maybe not, was making sure he stayed hidden. I went back to Austin with the Polaroid still tucked inside my wallet. Not because I needed to prove anything anymore, I knew what I'd seen, but because it was the only solid thread I had left. A photo with no date, no context, just Lucas standing stiff in front of that building like he was waiting for something he didn't want to happen. The handwriting on the back hadn't been his. I knew his handwriting. This was cleaner, more deliberate, almost printed. And that was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. It wasn't a note. It was a directive. Someone wanted me out of this, and that meant someone else knew I was getting close. I didn't go straight to Janet's. I sat in my car outside for a while, watching the porch light flicker like it always did. The bulb had been replaced so many times over the years that she'd started buying them in bulk. That little glow had outlasted news crews, search teams, and even hope depending on the day. When she finally opened the door, she didn't ask why I'd come. She just stepped aside to let me in and poured coffee into the same chipped mug she always gave me. I showed her the photo without saying anything. She stared at it, then pressed it flat against the kitchen counter with the edge of her hand like she was bracing it. "That's the building," I said. "East 7th near the viaduct. I found it." She didn't look at me right away, just said quietly, "Is he all right?" I didn't know how to answer that. He was alive, that much I could say, but nothing about this felt all right. I told her about the note. I told her I didn't think Lucas was the one sending warnings. I told her someone else was involved. She nodded like she'd known that all along, but hadn't wanted to say it out loud. And then she said something I wasn't expecting. "I heard something on the porch again," she said, "last week." I thought maybe I imagined it, but when I opened the door, there was a paper folded into the doormat. She walked over to the drawer by the fridge and pulled it out. It was just a small sketch done in pen on a scrap of notebook paper. A guitar leaned against a window, the strings half drawn with light coming in from the left side. The initials in the corner, MC, were faded but still visible. I looked at her. She just shrugged like it had become normal now. These little ghosts left on the doorstep, not asking to be found, but not exactly hiding either. I took the drawing with me, stared at it for hours that night. The light coming in from the left, there was something about it that felt purposeful, like it wasn't just a detail. I kept coming back to the apartment building. I'd only seen it in person once, and from the car. I hadn't gotten close, hadn't walked the block. So the next morning, I booked another flight. I didn't tell anyone this time. I just packed a bag and went. Back in LA, I took a cab instead of a rental, told the driver a street 2 blocks away, and walked the rest. It was early, not quite 7 a.m., and the neighborhood was quiet. No street vendors, yet just the sound of delivery trucks in the distance, and the occasional shuffle of someone walking to work. The building was just as I remembered, paint-peeling windows, fogged rust stains bleeding down the brick. I walked the perimeter slowly. There was an alley around back, mostly fenced off with an old mattress leaning against a dumpster and a cracked concrete wall tagged with layers of graffiti. And then I saw it. Tucked just above the dumpster, nearly hidden by a broken vent, was another mural. Small, maybe 3 feet wide. A boy on a fire escape holding a guitar. The paint was faded, but it hadn't been there long. I stepped closer. Same initials in the bottom corner. I took a photo and kept walking. Around the front of the building, there was a narrow entryway with mailboxes lined up inside a glass panel. One of them was labeled M. Carden. I stared at it. Not Merritt, not Carter, but close enough. Too close. I didn't buzz the apartment. I wasn't ready for that, not yet. Instead, I walked to the nearest cafe, sat down with a coffee I didn't drink, and pulled out my phone. I searched every tenant record building complaint and online listing I could find. Nothing under that name. Nothing official. It was like whoever lived there didn't want to be found, or didn't exist at all. Later that afternoon, I went back. This time I waited across the street. For hours. I watched people come and go, tenants' delivery drivers, a man who checked the mail twice and left without taking anything. Around dusk, a figure came around the corner. Hood up, shoulders hunched. He moved like he was trying to shrink into himself. But when he stepped into the stairwell light, I saw it. The bracelet. The same one I'd given Lucas when we were kids. Worn on the same wrist, the leather darkened with age, the clasp still intact. My chest tightened. I watched him reach for the key, pause, then glance over his shoulder like he felt something. But he didn't see me, just shook his head and stepped inside. I didn't follow. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, pulse pounding. I'd found him, or at least I'd found where he lived, but the question that had haunted us all for 12 years, the why, was still sealed behind that door. And now that I was this close, I had to ask myself if I was ready for the answer. Because finding someone isn't the same as getting them back. And what you uncover in the end isn't always what you came looking for. I stepped back from the curb, turned away from the building, and started walking. Not because I was giving up, but because the next time I knocked on that door, I wasn't going to be chasing a ghost. I was going to be talking to a man who chose to disappear, and I needed to be ready for whatever he was going to tell me. It took me 2 more days to go back. I walked past the building twice, once in the morning, and once just after sunset, both times telling myself I wasn't ready. The second time, I stood across the street for nearly an hour, watching the windows for any movement. Nothing. Just the soft hum of traffic and the occasional hiss of a passing bus. But something about that hallway stayed in my head, those metal mailboxes, the chipped paint, the way his shoulders turned just before he disappeared inside. On the 3rd day, I went early. Not because I thought he'd be more likely to answer, but because it was quiet then. Less noise, fewer people. I climbed the stairs, slowly stopping outside the same door I'd seen him unlock. My heart was pounding, not from fear exactly, more like pressure, like I was carrying something heavy I wasn't allowed to put down yet. I raised my hand and knocked. Nothing. I waited a minute, then knocked again. I could hear a TV through the wall, faint maybe a documentary or a news channel, but no footsteps, no voice, no sign of life on the other side. I stepped back, looked down the hall, then leaned forward and said quietly, "Lucas? It's me." I waited. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to understand. The silence on the other side stretched too long. I was about to turn away when I heard it. A slow scrape of a deadbolt. A click. Then another. The door opened just a few inches, just enough for a sliver of light and shadow. His eyes appeared first. Tired. Older. But still his. He didn't speak. Just looked at me for a long time, as if trying to figure out whether I was real. I didn't speak either. I just waited. Then finally he opened the door the rest of the way and stepped aside. The apartment was smaller than I expected. 1 room, maybe 400 square feet. A mattress on the floor. Sketches pinned haphazardly to the wall. Some of guitars, others of alleyways, fire escapes, doorways that all looked vaguely familiar. A portable fan buzzed from a corner, blowing across a stack of empty water bottles. The place smelled faintly of turpentine and cheap soap. Lucas sat down slowly on the edge of the mattress, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked thinner than I remembered, and older in ways that had nothing to do with years. I figured it was only a matter of time, he said, his voice rougher than I expected. "I saw you across the street 2 days ago." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He didn't ask me how I found him. He didn't ask why I'd come. Instead, he said, "You shouldn't have." I told him I wasn't there to drag him home. I just needed to know. He gave a slow, tired laugh. "Yeah, everyone always needs to know." We sat in silence for a minute. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my throat for 12 years. Why? He looked up at me, and for a moment I thought he might lie. Might say something about wanting freedom, needing space. But he didn't. It wasn't supposed to be forever, he said. At least, not at first. He stood, walked to the window and pulled the shade back a few inches, peering down at the street like he expected someone to be waiting. I found something in my dad's things. A folder, letters, threats, names I didn't recognize. But ours was in there. Mine, Mom's, Emily's, people he owed money to. Not small-time stuff either. Real people, the kind you don't make mistakes with. I didn't speak. He went on. That last year he was different. Nervous, locked doors he never used to lock, took different routes to work. I thought he was just drinking again, but it wasn't that. He was scared, and when he disappeared I thought maybe it had caught up to him. He let go of the shade and turned back toward me. I saw a man watching the house. The night I left, he was parked across the street. Just sitting there. No lights on. He didn't move. But I knew. I just knew. If I stayed, something was going to happen. And if I went to the police, I had no proof. No leverage. So I ran. I asked him why he never called. Why he let his mom believe he was dead. Why he let Emily grow up without a brother. His jaw tightened. Because once you disappear, you don't get to come back. Not really. You become a risk. To everyone. And for a while, I believed that was the only way I could keep them safe. I told him Janet had kept the porch light on. Every night. That Emily still didn't talk about him in the past tense. He rubbed his hands together, eyes closed, like the weight of those words physically hurt. I know, he said. I never stopped watching. I just couldn't step into that house again and bring danger with me. I asked him about the sketches, the postcards, the mural. He nodded slowly. I left them for her. For you. So you'd know I was still out here. I figured if something ever did happen to me, at least someone would know where to start. I stood there for a long time, not sure what to do with any of it. It wasn't closure, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was something real, and I could see that it cost him to say it out loud. Then, without warning, there was a knock at the door. 3 hard raps. Not impatient, not random, deliberate. Lucas froze, his face drained of color. He held up a hand without speaking, then moved silently to the peephole. Whoever it was, didn't speak, didn't knock again. Lucas backed away from the door and whispered, "You need to go. Now." I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to. I grabbed my bag and stepped into the hallway. Before I turned the corner, I looked back. He hadn't moved. Still standing there, back to the wall, listening. When I got outside, the sidewalk was empty. No one waiting. No car idling at the curb. But I didn't slow down. I walked 3 blocks before I finally called a cab. That night in my hotel room, I sat on the floor staring at my phone, unsure whether I should call Janet or Dana or anyone. What would I even say? That her son was alive, that he was scared, that he might still be in danger. None of it felt complete, and none of it felt safe. What I did know for the first time in all those years was that Lucas hadn't just vanished. He'd buried himself. And whatever he'd buried himself to escape hadn't gone away. The next morning, I left Los Angeles. I didn't text Lucas, didn't knock again. I didn't need to. I'd seen enough in his face, what little he'd let show, to know that whatever was happening behind that door wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. I flew back to Austin with no real plan, just a gut full of questions and the weight of something I hadn't been able to name until then, the understanding that finding someone isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just where the danger starts to feel real. I didn't go straight to Janet's house. I stopped at a gas station on the way from the airport and sat in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes. When I finally walked up the driveway, the porch light was still on. Morning sun behind me, bulbs still burning like it didn't know it wasn't needed in daylight. Janet opened the door with that same practiced calm she'd worn for years, like the only way to survive grief was to wear it neatly folded. I told her he was alive. I told her I saw him, that he let me inside. She didn't cry, not right away. She just sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the same spot on the wall she always did when she was trying not to fall apart. Then she asked if he looked okay. I said yes, but the word caught on the way out. Not because he looked bad exactly, he didn't, but because he didn't look like someone who slept through the night. She nodded. I showed her the photos, the apartment, the mural behind the dumpster. She touched her hand to the paper gently as if she could feel him through it. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, "So, what happens now?" I didn't have an answer for her. I told her about the knock on his door, about the way he froze, the look in his eyes. I told her I didn't think he was just hiding anymore, that something or someone was still close. "You think they followed him?" she asked. I said I didn't know, but if they had, then they could just as easily follow me, or worse her. I think that was the moment she realized the truth wasn't going to be enough to bring him home. It might be what kept him away for good. That night I found myself back in my own apartment, restless. I kept checking the windows, scanning the street outside, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Around midnight, I sat at the edge of my bed and opened my laptop. I still had the scanned versions of those sketches he'd left on postcards, on scraps of paper taped to murals tucked into mailboxes. I started laying them out digitally, side by side. At first it was just something to do, a way to feel like I hadn't dropped the thread. But then something strange happened. When I adjusted the contrast on one of the earlier sketches, the one of the guitar by the window, I noticed a pattern in the lines I hadn't seen before. Not part of the guitar, not shading. It looked intentional, but faint. Repeated in 3 other drawings, too, like a kind of mark he was embedding subtly always near the edges. Almost like a symbol. A shape that resembled a broken triangle. I didn't know what it meant, but it wasn't random. And once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. On the mural behind the laundromat, on the corner of the boy on the fire escape piece, even on the postcard from months back, the one with the river and the bikes. The next morning I called someone I hadn't talked to in years. His name was Darren Mays. We went to high school together. He'd gone into law enforcement, then moved into private security work out west. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. I asked if the symbol meant anything to him. When I sent the images, he called me back less than an hour later. "It's not standard gang tagging," he said, "but I've seen something close, mostly in financial records. Shell companies' wire transfers. Sometimes it's used as a watermark in documents where people are trying to flag internal threats without making it obvious." That hit me hard. I asked what kind of threats. He said organized debt blackmail chains, offshore laundering. If he's using that mark, he said he's signaling something to someone, or warning someone off. I asked how he knew. Darren said he'd seen it once on a ledger connected to a guy named Harlan Vest, someone who disappeared in 2003 after crossing the wrong people. I asked if that name ever came up with local law enforcement. He said no, not officially, but there were rumors. And once the money moves through enough layers, everything goes quiet. I hung up my hands cold. It wasn't just that Lucas was hiding. He was trying to communicate, quietly, carefully, in code, which meant the threat wasn't gone. It had simply changed shape. I started wondering how many messages I'd already missed, how many others he might have sent not to be seen but to be read by the right people. And if someone else knew how to read them, someone dangerous. How long before that door got another knock, I didn't sleep that night. I watched the window again, watched the street. At some point, I started writing everything down in a notebook, every date, every place I'd seen the initials or the mural or that quiet symbol pressed into a corner like a warning folded into a gift. It didn't feel like a puzzle I could solve, not really, but it felt like a map, and somewhere on that map, Lucas was trying to survive. The next day, I drove back to Janet's. Emily was there. She hadn't been told yet. I asked if I could talk to her alone. When I told her Lucas was alive, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stood there blinking slowly, like she couldn't quite place the sound of my voice. Then she said, "He said he'd never leave without telling me." I nodded. He didn't want to. He thought he had to. She sat down on the steps and hugged her knees. So why now I didn't have an answer. Only a quiet truth. Because I think he needs help, and he doesn't know how to ask for it. She asked if she could write him a letter. I said yes. I told her I'd find a way to get it to him, even if I had to slide it under the door myself. That night I booked another flight. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew the rules had changed, and whatever Lucas had been trying to protect us from it was still watching, still knocking, still close. I landed in Los Angeles just after dusk. The sky was still holding on to that last thin layer of gold before it slipped into gray and the city buzzed like it always did. Horns, sirens, music leaking from open windows. Everything moving too fast and too loud for anyone to notice someone watching. I didn't go straight to the apartment. I walked for a while first, past shops closing up, past people unlocking bikes or lighting cigarettes, all of them wrapped up in lives that had nothing to do with mine. I carried Emily's letter in my inside jacket pocket. She'd folded it twice, neat corners. No envelope, and had written only 3 lines. I hadn't read them. I told her I wouldn't. But I felt the weight of it every time I moved, like something pulsing just under the fabric. When I finally reached Lucas's building, I didn't hesitate this time. I didn't wait for quiet or for the hallway to empty. I went up the stairs and knocked. Once, then twice. I could hear movement inside, soft, deliberate, like someone deciding what to do with time that had just run out. The door opened slowly. He looked different again. Not in the way age changes someone, but in the way fear settles behind the eyes and doesn't go away. He stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was darker than before. No fan running. Just the thin hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere on the street below. He didn't ask why I'd come. He just sat down on the mattress and waited. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the letter, and handed it to him without a word. He held it for a second before opening it, careful not to tear the crease. His hands shook. I sat across from him on the floor, watching his face as he read. The way his jaw clenched, then slackened. The way his eyes drifted to the corner of the room when he finished, like he was trying not to be where he was. "She hates me," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No, she doesn't. But she's not a kid anymore. She's not going to pretend it didn't wreck her." He folded the paper and pressed it flat between his palms. "I want to write back," he said, "but I can't do it from here." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer right away. Just stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the edge of the curtain like he had a dozen times before. "They came again," he said. "Night before last. Same knock, same voice. They don't shout. They just wait. They know I won't open." I asked him if he'd seen their faces. He said no. They never stayed long. 5 minutes maybe. But it was enough. Enough to remind him the past hadn't gone anywhere. I told him about the symbol, the one I'd found repeating in his sketches. I told him about Darren Mays and what he'd said about financial ties and quiet warnings. Lucas nodded. "It's a tracker," he said. "Not the kind you plant in a car or on a phone. It's a visual one. You leave it in the open, but only certain people know what it means. It's a way to mark places safe, compromised, watched. My dad used it. That's how I learned. That caught me off guard. I asked him if he'd ever told anyone else. He said no. He didn't think anyone would believe him. When my dad disappeared, I went through his files. There were patterns, codes, places he used to mention in passing that weren't random. And when I found the last envelope, the one with names, addresses, account numbers, I knew it wasn't just gambling or debt. It was information, the kind people protect or destroy. I asked him where the envelope was now. He hesitated, then said, "Gone. I left it with someone when I ran." I pressed him. He wouldn't say who. "It's safer that way," he said. "They don't know I made a copy." That changed things. I asked where the copy was. He pointed to the far corner of the apartment where a small canvas sat turned to the wall. "It's in there," he said. "Not physically. Hidden in the painting, color sequences, spacing. I've been adding to it for years, whenever I thought I might not make it out." I crossed the room and picked up the canvas. The image was abstract layers of deep reds, grays, a broken black line through the middle. "If I disappear again," he said behind me, "you'll take it to Janet. You tell her I'm sorry it took so long. I asked him if he wanted to come home. He didn't answer right away, just leaned against the wall and closed his eyes." "I do," he said, "but not like this. Not with someone waiting outside my door every 3 nights to remind me I'm still part of whatever this is." I told him he couldn't keep running forever, that whatever he was carrying, it was time to turn it over. He nodded. "Then help me do it." That's when the idea started to take shape. Not a plan exactly, more like a beginning. We'd go to someone neutral, not the local police, not private security, but federal. Somewhere outside of state jurisdiction where old debts didn't influence current silence. Lucas didn't fight it. He just said, "But I won't be in the room when it happens." I spent the next day making phone calls. Quiet ones. I reached out to someone Darren had connected me with, a contact in San Antonio, who specialized in whistleblower cases involving corporate and financial networks. I didn't use Lucas's name. I just said I had sensitive material involving an old case possibly tied to a dormant identity laundering ring. The man didn't sound surprised. He said to bring what I had alone, said they'd keep it off record until they'd verified it. That was enough for now. When I returned to Lucas's apartment that night, he handed me a second canvas. Smaller, lighter. He said it was the duplicate. "If anything happens to me," he said, "you give them this. You don't wait." I asked if he was planning to disappear again. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. "It's not about hiding anymore," he said. "It's about making sure this ends with someone knowing the truth." I told him I'd see it through, no matter what. He looked at me for a long time, then reached over and placed Emily's letter back into my hand. "Give that to her yourself," he said. "If this works, I'll follow in a few days." I didn't ask him to promise. I just nodded, tucked the letter into my coat, and left before I could change my mind. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have. The street was empty quiet, but I didn't stop walking. I didn't turn back to check the window. I knew he'd be watching from behind the curtain. Just like always. Just like before. The only difference now was that we weren't waiting in silence anymore. The canvas in my hand held more than paint. And if we were lucky, it held enough truth to end whatever had started 12 years ago on a quiet street in Austin with a plate of meatloaf left going cold. I met with the agent in San Antonio just after sunrise. The streets were still quiet, save for the sweep of tires over wet pavement and the rustle of wind against the low brick buildings. I handed over the canvas without a word, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine like it might have come from a roadside market, and not the center of something that had lived under silence for over a decade. The agent took it carefully, didn't ask too many questions. Just said they'd be in touch and that if what I'd told them was true, it wouldn't be buried this time. I didn't wait around. I got back on the road before traffic picked up the letter to Emily still folded in the glove box. Lucas never showed. I waited 5 days in a hotel outside Kerrville. No call, no message. On the 6th, I drove back to Los Angeles. His apartment was empty, blinds drawn, door locked from the inside. No sign of struggle, no evidence left behind. The landlord said the rent had been paid 6 months in advance, all cash, just like before. The last time I saw him, he asked me not to promise. I didn't, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't hoped he'd walk out of that building even once, even for a minute. I flew back to Austin 2 days later and gave Emily the letter myself. We sat on a bench just outside the park where it all began, where she used to toss breadcrumbs to squirrels and complain about how cold the water fountains were. She didn't read the letter right away, just held it in her hands like something she wasn't ready to open but needed to know was real. We didn't talk much. She asked if he was okay. I said I didn't know. She nodded. That was enough. The investigation did move forward. Slowly, quietly. Names started to surface. Old names. Financial accounts tied to shadow corporations, payments disguised as grants and nonprofits that never filed taxes. The symbol Lucas painted had been used before on murals in neighborhoods where people had vanished in the corner of flyers that circulated for 1 day and were never seen again. It wasn't just a tracker. It was a flag. A signal to those in the know. A message to those being watched. Lucas's name was never made public. Neither was mine. The story the agency released focused on the network money laundering, coercion missing persons linked by vague affiliations and subtle threats. It wasn't headline material. No trials aired on television, no nightly segments. Just quiet justice. The kind that never feels like enough but means the harm doesn't keep repeating unchecked. Emily never changed her number in case he ever called. Some nights she still leaves the porch light on, just in case. She's older now. Wiser, too. Not in the bitter way some people age, but in the way of someone who knows the cost of waiting and chooses to remember anyway. As for me, I learned that not all disappearances end with answers. Sometimes they end with a question that no longer needs to be solved, only carried. And carrying it, that's its own kind of justice. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it. Sometimes the most forgotten names are the ones that need remembering most.